Hi, everybody, and welcome to the chapter on adolescence. Adolescence is the developmental stage that lies between childhood and adulthood, beginning just before the teenage years at 12 years old and ending just after the teenage years at the age of 20. In adolescence, we're going to see that kids end up having a physical growth spurt, which is going to be a period of rapid development and growth in height and weight during adolescence, and they're going to start taking on more adult characteristics externally. Puberty also occurs during adolescence, and this is a period of maturation where sexual organs begin to develop. Both puberty and growth spurts start at young ages for females. They're starting younger over time, on average around 10 years old, which is pretty crazy. Whereas growth spurts and puberty onset for boys happens a little bit later, typically on average around the age of 12. Girls are also going to experience menarche, which is the onset of menstruation in young females. However, keep in mind that this can be delayed depending on what sort of activities the female is involved in. So girls with very, very low body fat, this may be delayed. Girls who are gymnasts, very extremely active in sports, this onset might be delayed based on those issues. Both genders experience surges of hormones during this time period, and those side effects from those hormones are going to be different based on gender. So boys are going to experience things like anger, frustration, aggression, annoyance, whereas girls are going to experience things like anger, sadness, and depression. Okay, so it's going to manifest differently based on gender. In terms of early maturation, boys who start growing early and they hit their growth spurt early, because they start taking on those secondary characteristics of adults, they tend to look older and therefore start adopting older behaviors, or people have expectations of behaviors of them that are older than their age because they look older than their age. So therefore, they are more likely to engage in delinquency and alcohol use. Whereas girls who experience early maturation and start looking older when they are still, in fact, quite young are more likely to end up engaging in sexual activity when they're not psychologically prepared for that stage of their life yet. The rapid increase in growth during this stage requires an increase in calorie consumption. So we will see kids this age eating more food. That's normal. That's healthy. They need to fuel the rapid development and the rapid growth. But of course, that comes with two issues when we have this disruption in caloric intake because the body needs more, that either we struggle with things like childhood obesity, or eating disorders are common at this age group, and they begin at this age group. There are greater rates of childhood obesity now than ever before. We've already discussed this, which has lifelong impacts on health struggles, things like heart disease, respiratory issues, diabetes, and self-esteem issues that, plague people all throughout the life course. Eating disorders are far more common in females than they are in males. However, in recent decades, males are closing this gap. This used to be a primarily female issue, but we have found that it's actually more and more boys are falling into eating disorders as well. There are two primary eating disorders. There's anorexia, which is the denial of food or to the point of starvation, and bulimia, which is the practice of binging food and then purging, whether that purging is through forced vomiting or use of excessive laxatives, or even in some cases use of wildly excessive exercise, exercising 3 or 4 hours a day to purge the body of the calories. Regardless of what form it takes, this creates dysfunctional food relationships that extend well beyond adolescence throughout the life course. And it also, comes with a host of other health threats, things like depression, things like anxiety. In cases of severe anorexia, we're looking at things like muscle deterioration, potential heart failure, and death. Where binging and purging is concerned, with bulimia, with vomiting, we see that individuals who do this have an increased rate of esophageal cancer from that constant exposure to the stomach acids that are constantly being brought up the esophagus. And also the erosion of the esophagus and just stomach issues, digestive tract issues in general. 15 to 20% of females who engage in anorexia actually engage in it to the point of, they starve themselves to the point of death, where there's a point of no return, and the body begins to break down and they die. So this can be an extraordinarily serious issue among a decent number of females. In terms of cognitive development, the human brain is obviously still growing all throughout adolescence. In fact, it grows all throughout adolescence and well into the early 20s. Female cognitive development ends before male cognitive development. Brain growth is done usually by about 20 or 21 years of age, whereas the male brain continues to grow well into 23, 24, 25. The centers of the brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, are still growing, and those are areas that are responsible for things like judgment, decision making, impulse control, all the things that are required for us to make good decisions and to keep us out of trouble, which is why we see people in this age group, and especially boys in this age group, young men in this age group, getting into a lot of trouble, but also having high risks of accidents and accidental death during this time period. Simply, the brain isn't done growing yet. They don't have impulse control. They don't have the ability for delayed gratification. All those things that take place in that prefrontal cortex, which is not yet done growing. Threats to adolescent development. This is a time where there's going to be a lot of external threats that come in, specifically things like drug use. Adolescents are just starting to experiment with drugs and alcohol at this stage. This is more dangerous now than it has ever been because of the opioid crisis, and specifically because so many illegal narcotics are being caught with fentanyl. Fentanyl exposure almost always results in immediate overdose and death for people who have never been exposed to it before, which puts adolescents who are dabbling with drugs in a really, really vulnerable position, and really at risk for accidental overdose, when even if it's just the first time they're trying something. Right, that if there's fentanyl in there at all, their bodies have no resistance to it. They go into respiratory failure and they die. This is also something that has a relationship to lifelong addiction issues, so that when kids start dabbling or experimenting in adolescence, they are more likely to carry that into adulthood and develop full-blown addictions. The same is true with adolescents who start dabbling with alcohol and tobacco use as well. Alcoholism and tobacco addiction both have lifelong health problems, a lot of different cancers that come in there, a lot of disruptive behaviors and lifestyles that result from alcoholism. Respiratory problems and liver malfunction. So it's best, obviously, to provide adolescents with a lot of education about the negative impacts of drug and alcohol use and tobacco use and long-term addiction, so that it doesn't become a lifestyle for them. It doesn't become something that starts in adolescence and continues until well through adulthood, until they hit cancer or death or whatever. The social impact. So social lives become more important at adolescence than almost any other stage throughout life. Social engagement becomes a primary focus for people in this age group. Excuse me. More so than any other stage of development. The development of friendships in a social circle is of extreme importance to people of this age, and there's a strong desire for peer identification. Those who have a hard time developing this may suffer from anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, low confidence, etc. This is also the stage of life where we see the onset of sexual behaviors. And with that comes a multitude of other concerns, obviously teenage pregnancy being one, that especially depending on how young the teen is, their body is not ready to be pregnant, and certainly emotionally and cognitively, they're not ready to be pregnant and to take care of a child. But they also have to be focusing on concerns about sexually transmitted infections. These are large responsibilities to identify, manage, and take care of for somebody who's still so emotionally and cognitively young and underdeveloped, which all of this can result in, large amounts of stress, shame, social judgment, and adolescent isolation. So these are all concerns that start becoming regular factors in this stage of development. And finally, in this stage, our young people are starting to look to the future, to the adult future, more than they ever have. And they're starting to think about choosing careers and choosing life pathways. So they start thinking about, what am I going to do after high school? Do I want to go to college? Do I want to go to trade school? Do I just want to go into the workforce? If I do, what kind of work do I want to do? So it's a time of figuring things out. It's a time of self-exploration. It's an overwhelming thing for them to have to figure out at such a young age what exactly they want to do. So it can also be really stressful, right? Because they have to do a lot of personal introspection. And a lot of kids at that age simply don't know what they want to do, right? They don't know what they want to do. So this can be a huge challenge that can result in a lot of stress and insecurity.